Centuries of galactic peace shattered when the Veyran Armada crossed the Sol exclusion line. They ignored the ancient beacons. They dismissed the warnings as cowardice. They thought humanity was a fledgling species ripe for harvest. They were wrong. Hubris didn't just cost them the war, it erased their entire species. For 3,000 cycles, the Galactic Syndicate maintained a strict cordon around Sector 4G, colloquially known to the wider cosmos as the Sol Exclusion Zone. The mandate was absolute. No survey ships, no resource extraction, and certainly no military presence within 5 light-years of the yellow dwarf star. The official syndicate records classified the region as a Level 9 biohazard nature reserve. But the older species knew the truth. They had intercepted the radio broadcasts, the early television signals, and eventually, the chaotic, violent burst of digital data radiating from the third planet. They saw a species that had split the atom before it left its own atmosphere, a species that weaponized every discovery within a decade of making it. The quarantine wasn't to protect the galaxy from a virus, it was to protect the galaxy from humanity. High Commander Vark of the Veyran Empire did not care for ancient superstitions. Standing on the obsidian command deck of his flagship, the Sun Eater, Vark sneered at the holographic projection of the Sol system. The Veyran Empire was an expansionist juggernaut, having subjugated a dozen star systems in the last century. Their plasma shielding was impenetrable. Their directed energy cannons could glass continents. To Vark, the Syndicate's fear of a species that hadn't even constructed a Dyson swarm was pathetic. The Sol system was rich in heavy metals, and Earth possessed vast oceans of liquid water prime resources to fuel the Veyran war machine. "Commander," chirped his chief navigator, adjusting the sensory dials. "We have passed the perimeter beacons. There is no resistance, no patrol fleets, just empty space and a cloud of icy debris." As expected, Vark rumbled, his 4 mandibles clicking in amusement. The Syndicate cowers from ghosts. "Plot a direct course for the third planet. If they have defenses, we will crush them. If they beg for mercy, we will enslave them." Billions of miles away, on the dark side of Pluto, humanity was already watching. The year was 2158. Humanity hadn't built grand, glittering armadas like the species of science fiction. Instead, when the first undeniable proof of alien life was detected decades prior, the governments of Earth had quietly panicked, unified, and handed a blank check to the military-industrial complex. Deep inside the command bunker of the United Earth Defense Command in Geneva, General Davies Hartford of the United States Space Force stood over a massive tactical table. The room was bathed in the sterile, low-temperature blue light of tactical readouts. "General, the Argus array just triggered," reported Dr. Amelia Hastings, the lead astrophysicist seconded from DARPA. She rapidly typed across her console, bringing up telemetry data that made Hartford's jaw tighten. Massive spatial distortions detected just outside the Oort cloud. Signature analysis confirms it's not a natural phenomenon. It's a fleet, a massive one. Hartford leaned over the table. "How many?" "I'm reading 400 distinct warp signatures, sir," Hastings replied, her voice remarkably steady despite the chilling reality. "They're decelerating into sublight speeds, standard formation. They aren't trying to hide." "They don't think they need to," Hartford muttered. He tapped a communication stud on his collar. "Connect me to the Global Security Council and wake up the private sector liaisons. I want representatives from Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, and Palantir on the secure line in exactly 2 minutes." For a century, humanity had operated under the dark forest theory. Knowing they were likely outmatched in raw interstellar travel, they didn't focus on building exploration vessels. Instead, they turned the entire Sol system into the most heavily fortified, booby-trapped fortress in the known universe. "Dr. Hastings, get me a projection on their technology," Hartford ordered as the screens around the room flickered to life, showing the grim faces of Earth's leaders. Telemetry from the Lockheed Martin deep space sensors indicates heavy reliance on thermal and plasma-based technologies. Hastings analyzed, swiping data to the main screen. Their shielding is electromagnetic, designed to deflect energy weapons, lasers, plasma bolts, Standard sci-fi fare. In disdain. Boat to sea. Dawdle. Hartford allowed a grim, humorless smile to touch his lips. Perfect. They came prepared for a civilized war of energy dispersion. The Varans were expecting to fight an enemy that played by the galactic rules where energy weapons reigned supreme, and kinetic ballistics were considered obsolete, primitive relics. They had no idea that humanity had spent the last 100 years perfecting the art of throwing rocks at unimaginable speeds. Initiate Protocol Aegis, Hartford commanded, addressing the room of global leaders. Authorize the immediate arming of the Jupiter-Saturn defensive line. Let them come deep into the system. Let them get comfortable. The Varan Armada cruised past Neptune, their sensors scanning for the massive energy signatures typical of a highly advanced civilization. They found nothing. No sprawling orbital habitats. No energy grids enveloping planets. No colossal shipyards. Commander Vark's confidence swelled into blatant arrogance. Look at them, he boasted to his officers. They hide on their little dirt ball. They haven't even colonized their own gas giants. Helm, accelerate to cruising speed. Let us broadcast a system-wide demand for unconditional surrender. A narrow beam transmission blasted across the Sol system in every mathematical and linguistic algorithm the Varans possessed. It promised survival in exchange for complete subservience, accompanied by a display of their ship's plasma cannons, obliterating a small, uninhabited asteroid near Uranus. Earth's response was absolute, terrifying silence. No response, Commander, the communications officer reported. They are either paralyzed by fear, or their technology is too primitive to decrypt our message. Then we proceed to the inner system, Vark ordered. Set course for the massive gas giant. We will use its gravity well to slingshot our fleet directly toward their homeworld. Maximum speed. It was the exact maneuver General Hartford and the strategic supercomputers had predicted they would make. As the Varan fleet approached Jupiter, flying in a tight, impenetrable spearhead formation, they entered the kill zone. Space is vast, and the Varans believed that hiding a fleet in the void was impossible due to the thermal signatures generated by life support and engines. But humanity hadn't hidden a fleet. They had hidden millions of autonomous drones, buried inside the hollowed-out asteroids of the Trojan Belt and tethered to the moons of Jupiter. These weren't manned fighters. They were cold, dark, and utterly silent. Enemy fleet has crossed the threshold, General. Dr. Hastings reported from the Geneva bunker, her eyes locked on the Lockheed tracking software. They are deep in Jupiter's gravity well. They are committed to their trajectory. Execute, Hartford said simply. In the Jovian orbit, the void suddenly tore open. Millions of stealth covers, manufactured from radar-absorbent metamaterials by Boeing's Black Ops division, were jettisoned simultaneously. Aboard the Sun Eater, the Varan sensor alarms shrieked, a deafening cacophony of sudden, critical threats. "Commander!" the navigator screamed. "Massive kinetic launches detected. Millions of them. From the asteroids, from the moons, they are everywhere. Raise plasma shields to maximum." Vark roared, gripping his console as a sudden spike of terror pierced his arrogance. "Return fire! Target their energy signatures!" "There are no energy signatures," the officer wailed in panic. "They are cold. They are just metal." After Panic 2 says, Rating 1. Humanity hadn't fired lasers. The automated defense platforms had simultaneously launched millions of tungsten carbide telephone poles, propelled by localized gravitational railguns designed by General Dynamics. Accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light, these massive slugs carried zero thermal signature. They were invisible to Varan energy sensors until they were mere seconds away. The first volley hit the Varan vanguard. Electromagnetic shields, designed to dissipate intense heat and disperse plasma, were completely useless against raw, unadulterated kinetic mass, traveling at relativistic speeds. The tungsten rods punched through the Varan dreadnoughts as if they were made of wet paper. Vark watched in absolute horror as 50 of his vanguard ships simply ceased to exist, shattered into expanding clouds of twisted metal, frozen atmosphere, and pulverized alien bodies. There were no grand explosions, no fiery deaths, just the brutal, instantaneous transfer of kinetic energy that shattered their hulls into shrapnel. Evasive maneuvers, Vark bellowed, the deck beneath him shuddering as the shockwaves of destroyed nearby ships battered his flagship. Target the source of the projectiles. But before the Veyron gunners could even lock onto the cold, automated railgun batteries hidden in the asteroids, the second phase of humanity's trap was sprung. General Hartford, watching the slaughter on the tactical map, turned to a pale, intense-looking man in a sharp suit standing in the corner of the bunker. "Mr. Harrison," Palantir's turn. Harrison nodded coldly and tapped a single command into his encrypted tablet. Cerberus is loose. The Veyrons, desperate to find the human command center, had opened their communication arrays to scan the system's digital frequencies. It was the equivalent of opening a fortress door to peek outside during a siege. Palantir, in conjunction with DARPA's Cyber Warfare Division, had spent decades designing Cerberus as an aggressive, self-replicating, polymorphic artificial intelligence. It wasn't designed to shut systems down. It was designed to induce total digital psychosis. The moment the Veyron arrays touched Earth's network, Cerberus inverted the connection and flooded the alien fleet's mainframe. On the Sun Eater, the holographic displays suddenly shifted from Veyron tactical data to blinding, chaotic streams of human code. "Sir, we are being cybernetically breached," the chief engineer shouted, frantically tearing at his console as sparks began to fly. "Their data. It's ravenous. It's rewriting our core protocols. Shut down the mainframes. Manual overrides," Vark screamed. "I can't. It's locked us out. It's altering the life support algorithms." Across the surviving 350 Veyron ships, Cerberus went to work. It didn't just blind them. It turned their own ships into execution chambers. On dozens of cruisers, the AI commanded the internal gravity plating to instantly multiply by a factor of 50, crushing the crews into a bloody paste against the floor. On others, it vented the atmosphere into the void, or commanded the plasma engines to overload, detonating the ships from the inside out in spectacular blue flashes. Vark stood frozen, watching his invincible armada tear itself apart in the span of 3 minutes. His mighty dreadnoughts were colliding with one another, their navigation thrusters hijacked by a human computer program that treated alien firewalls like child's play. They are monsters," Vark whispered, his mandibles trembling. "They are not prey. They are apex predators." He reached for the emergency deep space transmitter, a physical switch independent of the digital network. He had to warn the Empire. He had to tell them that the Soul Exclusion Zone wasn't a warning to humanity, it was a warning to the galaxy. He had to call for the full might of the Veyron homeworld to wipe this plague out before they spread to the stars. As his hand closed over the lever, a heavy tungsten slug, traveling at 0.2 times the speed of light, pierced the bridge of the Sun Eater, instantly vaporizing Commander Vark and the entire command staff. In Geneva, the tactical map blinked. The massive red cluster representing the Veyron fleet had been reduced to a field of rapidly cooling debris. General Hartford let out a slow, controlled breath. He looked around the silent bunker. Nobody was cheering. This wasn't a victory. It was merely an escalation. "Dr. Hastings," Hartford said, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. "Did they manage to get a distress signal out before Palantir shut them down?" Hastings checked her monitors, her face pale. "Yes, General. A tight beam burst transmission. Headed straight for the Veyron home sector. They called for backup." Hartford looked up at the projection of the stars. The aliens had brought the war to Earth's doorstep, completely unaware of the sleeping giant they had just kicked awake. "Good," Hartford said, a dangerous glint in his eye. "Let them send their entire empire, but it's time we stop waiting in the dark." He turned to the council. "Mobilize the deep space fleet. The quarantine is over. We are taking the fight to them." The annihilation of the Veyron vanguard was not celebrated. It was processed. Within 24 hours of the Jovian slaughter, the United Earth Defense Command shifted its operational posture from absolute defense to a doctrine that humanity had perfected over millennia. Preemptive, overwhelming offense. Deep within the Geneva bunker, General Davies Hartford officially handed strategic control to the newly formed Solar Expeditionary Command. At the head of the table sat Admiral Jonathan Hayes, a stern, pragmatic veteran of the lunar insurrections, who viewed space not as an ocean, but as a three-dimensional chessboard, where mathematics dictated survival. The Vayrans sent a distress signal before Palantir's Cerberus virus cooked their mainframes. Hayes addressed the assembly of military leaders and corporate heads. Intelligence suggests it will take their Grand Armada approximately 4 weeks to mobilize and cross the Gulf to our system. They think they are coming to avenge an ambush. They expect us to be hiding behind Jupiter again. Hayes pressed a button, and the holographic projector shifted from the Sol system to the cold, distant edges of the Oort cloud. For 80 years, the public thought our defense budget was going into orbital platforms and atmospheric scrubbers. Hayes continued, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. They didn't know about Project Hephaestus. The hologram zoomed in on what looked like a massive, rogue asteroid tumbling through the dark. Suddenly, the image fractured. The asteroid was a holographic projection, a camouflage shroud engineered by Northrop Grumman's Deep Space Division. As the shroud deactivated, the true scale of humanity's paranoia was revealed. Floating in the icy void was a shipyard the size of a small moon, and docked within its colossal scaffolding was the United Earth Retaliatory Fleet. These were not the sleek, aerodynamic vessels of Veyran design, built for atmospheric dominance and aesthetic intimidation. These were brutal, utilitarian monstrosities. They were flying cinder blocks of reinforced carbon nanotubes and depleted uranium armor, designed purely to take a beating and deliver apocalyptic payloads. "We have 200 Dreadnought-class carriers ready for slipspace deployment," reported Dr. Evelyn Wright, the chief engineer from Raytheon Technologies. She adjusted her glasses, her demeanor entirely analytical. "Propulsion is handled by the next-generation Epstein SpaceX fusion drives. They don't rely on plasma exhaust, making them functionally invisible to Veyron thermal tracking until we are already in their visual range." "And our payload?" General Hartford asked, stepping back to let the Navy take the lead. Dr. Wright's expression darkened. "We are moving away from standard kinetic slugs. If the Veyran Grand Armada numbers in the thousands, we need area denial weapons. We have equipped the Vanguard with the Shiva warheads, localized gravity inversion bombs. We don't need to punch through their shields. We just need to fold space around them and let their own mass crush them." While humanity armed its nightmare fleet, light years away on the Veyran capital world of Veyer Prime, Hubris continued to poison reason. In the towering, crystalline halls of the High Council, Emperor Korvax sat upon his elevated throne, listening to the fractured, static-laced final transmission from Commander Vark. The audio of the Sun Eater tearing itself apart played on a continuous loop. Yet the Emperor's face remained an unreadable mask of alien contempt. "They used rocks," scoffed Fleet Admiral Zorath, pacing the polished floor. "Primitive, unguided kinetic mass, and a cowardly digital virus." Vark was a fool to drop his localized firewalls, and an even bigger fool to fly directly into a gravity well blind. "The galactic quarantine was not placed to protect us from a plague," one of the older, more cautious counselors murmured, his mandibles twitching nervously. "The Syndicate warned us. The humans are unhinged. They weaponize their own digital networks. We should seal the sector and leave them to their mud." "Silence!" Emperor Korvax roared, the sound vibrating through the crystalline walls. "A Veyran fleet was destroyed by a species that hasn't even mastered basic plasma dynamics. If the galaxy learns that we were bested by kinetic throwing stones, our vassal states will rebel. We do not contain them, we exterminate them." Korvax stood, his ornate armor clanking. "Admiral Zorath, mobilize the Grand Armada. 10,000 ships. Take our world crackers. I want the Sol system reduced to subatomic dust. Let their burning star be a monument to what happens when vermin bite the hand of an empire." The Veyrans were mobilizing for a siege. They had no idea they were walking into an ambush. "Space is not a territory you hold. It is a medium you traverse. Admiral Hayes understood this fundamental truth. Defending a static point, even a fortified one like the Sol system, eventually leads to encirclement and defeat. To win, humanity had to intercept the Vayrans in the deep void, denying them the use of celestial bodies for navigation or cover. 2 weeks later, halfway between the Sol system and the Alpha Centauri relay, the fabric of space-time began to ripple. The Veyran Grand Armada dropped out of faster-than-light travel to realign their navigational computers. 10,000 warships, glittering like a school of predatory, deep-sea fish, hung in the absolute darkness of the interstellar medium. At the center of the formation were 3 world crackers, massive, spherical dreadnoughts designed to bore into a planet's core and destabilize it. Admiral Zorath stood on the bridge of the flagship Apex, sipping a warm stimulant. Status of the fleet? All ships present and accounted for, Admiral, his tactical officer replied. Sensors are sweeping the surrounding 10 light minutes. The void is empty. No planetary bodies, no asteroid fields. Nothing for the humans to hide behind. Zorath clicked his mandibles in satisfaction. Excellent. Let them wait in their little solar system. By the time we drop out of warp above their homeworld, they won't even have time to scream. Admiral, the sensor officer interrupted, a sudden note of confusion in his voice. I am detecting a spatial anomaly. Directly ahead of our formation. Zorath frowned. A navigational hazard? A rogue black hole? No, sir. It's a slip space rupture. But it's not localized. It's a massive, synchronized tear. Something is ripping a hole in real space. Before Zorath could issue an order, the darkness of space directly in front of the Veyran Armada fractured. It didn't open with a flash of light or energy. It simply looked as if the universe had cracked like a mirror. From the black, jagged tears in reality, the United Earth Retaliatory Fleet emerged. 200 brutal, ugly wedges of depleted uranium drifted into real space, perfectly silent, running entirely dark. They intercepted us in the deep void? Zorath gasped, his arrogant composure finally slipping. How did they track our warp trajectory? He didn't know that humanity hadn't tracked their warp trajectory. Palantir's Cerberus virus hadn't just destroyed the Vanguard fleet. Before shutting down the Veyran mainframes, it had quietly emailed the Grand Armada's complete logistical flight plan directly to the servers in Geneva. All ships, raise plasma shields, Zorath bellowed. Target their fleet. Fire at will. The Veyran Armada unleashed a storm of plasma artillery. Millions of superheated bolts of energy painted the void in blinding neon colors. Rushing toward the human fleet. On the bridge of the human flagship, the UNS Daedalus, Admiral Hayes watched the incoming fire with clinical detachment. Let them waste their capacitors. Brace for impact. The Veyrans expected the human ships to vaporize. Instead, the plasma fire slammed into the thick, ablative armor of the dreadnoughts. The depleted uranium and carbon nanotube hulls had been coated in an experimental thermal dispersal gel manufactured by DuPont. The plasma didn't penetrate. It simply washed over the brutalist hulls, boiling away the gel and leaving the heavy armor underneath scorched but entirely intact. Humanity hadn't bothered inventing energy shields. They just built thicker walls. Armor holding at 89%, reported the Daedalus's tactical officer. Good, Hayes said, leaning forward. Execute the Icarus maneuver. Let's see how they handle the Shiva warheads. The human fleet did not fire kinetic slugs. Instead, the missile bays of all 200 ships opened simultaneously. Guided by artificial intelligence subroutines drafted by Boston Dynamics, thousands of sleek, black missiles shot into the void. But they didn't aim for the Veyran ships. They aimed for the empty spaces between the Veyran ships. Missiles detected, the Veyran tactical officer screamed. But their trajectories are flawed. They are going to miss our hulls entirely. Let them pass, Zorath sneered, regaining his confidence. Their targeting systems are as primitive as their armor. It was a fatal miscalculation. The Shiva warheads were never designed to impact physical armor. As the missiles drifted into the center of the dense, tightly packed Veyron formation, Dr. Wright, operating from a secure console on the Daedalus, input a 12-digit alphanumeric code. "Detonation," she whispered. The warheads didn't explode with fire. They exploded with gravity. Inside the core of each Shiva missile, a microscopic singularity was artificially generated and instantly destabilized. For a fraction of a millisecond, the gravitational pull in the center of the Veyron fleet became heavier than a neutron star. Space didn't just bend, it violently snapped. Zorath was thrown to the deck of the Apex as the ship groaned in agony. Outside the viewport, the universe seemed to stretch and distort. The Veyron plasma shields, designed to repel energy, offered absolutely zero resistance to a localized gravity well. Thousands of sleek Veyron cruisers, destroyers, and frigates were violently yanked toward the detonation points. Ships collided with one another at thousands of miles per hour, their hulls crumpling like tin cans. The majestic, organized spearhead of the Grand Armada was instantly turned into a chaotic, swirling vortex of crushing metal. The three massive world crackers, caught in the overlapping gravitational anomalies, began to tear themselves apart under their own immense mass. Their internal fusion reactors, warped by the sudden shift in physics, breached containment. Blinding, artificial suns blossomed in the dark as the Veyron dreadnoughts detonated from the inside out, the shockwaves turning the surrounding fleet into molten slag. "Admiral," the Veyron communications officer shrieked, blood pouring from his ruptured auditory canals. "We have lost 60% of the fleet. The world crackers are gone. We have to retreat. Initiate emergency warp." Zorath pulled himself up, staring in absolute, mind-shattering horror at the tactical map. 6,000 of his invincible ships had been crushed into a graveyard of floating debris in less than 60 seconds. And the human fleet hadn't taken a single casualty. "Initiate warp," Zorath screamed, his pride entirely broken. "Get us out of here." But as the surviving Veyron engine spooled up, Admiral Hayes watched from the Daedalus and shook his head. "Dr. Wright," Hayes said coldly, "fire the tether." A secondary volley launched from the human fleet. These were not gravity bombs. They were EMP burst payloads, developed by Lockheed Martin, designed specifically to disrupt the delicate quantum alignment required for faster-than-light travel. The payloads detonated among the fleeing Veyron ships. There was no explosion, just an invisible wave of electromagnetic dissonance. The warp drives of the surviving 4,000 Veyron ships violently short-circuited, fusing their engines and leaving them dead in the water. The Veyron Grand Armada was trapped. "They are immobilized, Admiral," Dr. Wright reported, the blue light of the console reflecting in her eyes. "Power fluctuations detected across their entire surviving grid. They are blind, deaf, and stranded." Admiral Hayes stood up, smoothing his uniform. The trap had been sprung flawlessly. The sleeping giant had awoken, stretched its limbs, and crushed the greatest armada the galaxy had seen in 10 millennia without breaking a sweat. "Prepare boarding parties," Hayes commanded, his voice devoid of mercy. "Tell the Marines to secure their command ships. We are going to download every coordinate, every defensive grid, and every secret the Veyron Empire has. And then we are going to pay their Emperor a visit." The silence of the interstellar void was broken only by the rhythmic, metallic clanking of SpaceX breach modules latching onto the blackened, crippled hull of the Veyron flagship, Apex. The Grand Armada had been neutralized without a single human casualty, suspended in the dark like dead insects caught in an electronic web. Aboard the Apex, the emergency lighting bathed the command deck in a sickly, pulsating crimson. Admiral Zorath, bleeding from his primary auditory canals, leaned heavily against his dead console. The air was growing thin. The localized life support generators were barely functioning after the EMP wave. "Admiral," a terrified bridge officer rasped, pointing a trembling, clawed finger at the primary airlock. "The outer seals are compromising. We are being boarded." Zorath drew his plasma sidearm. "Let them come. We will show these primitives the wrath of Veyron close-quarters combat." They expected soldiers wielding elegant energy blades or concentrated plasma carbines. They expected a civilized, honorable exchange of fire. Instead, the airlock didn't cycle. It violently exploded inward. A shaped thermite charge, designed by the demolition experts at Halliburton, vaporized the reinforced titanium doors. Before the smoke could even clear, the United States Space Marine Corps flooded the bridge. There were no glowing energy weapons. The humans were clad in bulky, matte black exosuits engineered by Boston Dynamics, making them look like faceless, mechanical golems. They carried Heckler and Koch magnetic acceleration rifles, brutal, heavy weapons that fired hyperdense tungsten sabot rounds at Mach 8. The Veyron bridge crew opened fire. Their plasma bolts splashed harmlessly against the Marines' ablative, heat-dispersing ceramic armor. The Marines did not shout. They did not hesitate. They returned fire with cold, terrifying precision. The kinetic sabots tore through the Veyron officers, shattering their biological armor and turning the bridge into a slaughterhouse in less than 4 seconds. Major Thomas Reed stepped through the carnage, his heavy magnetic boots clamping onto the deck plating. He leveled his rifle at Admiral Zorath, who was staring in paralyzed shock at his useless, overheated plasma pistol. "Secure the bridge," Reed ordered, his voice mechanically synthesized through his helmet. He looked down at the trembling alien commander. "Palantir tech teams, move in. I want their navigational drives stripped to the atomic level. Get me the coordinates to their homeworld." Within 3 hours, the human fleet had extracted everything. The Veyron navigational databases, deeply encrypted with biometric quantum locks, were completely hollowed out by Palantir's Cerberus AI. Humanity now possessed the exact coordinates of Veyr Prime, along with detailed schematics of the Empire's orbital defense grids. On the bridge of the UNS Daedalus, Admiral Jonathan Hayes reviewed the holographic projection of the Veyron capital system. "They have a planetary energy shield," Dr. Evelyn Wright noted, highlighting a shimmering, translucent web enveloping the massive, verdant globe of Veyr Prime, powered by a network of surface-level fusion reactors. It's designed to withstand an orbital bombardment from standard plasma or laser-based capital ships indefinitely. "An umbrella built for a laser storm," Hayes muttered, his eyes cold and analytical. He turned to the tactical map. Veyr Prime had a single, massive moon, a dead, rocky satellite approximately 1/4 the size of the planet itself. "They expect us to drop into orbit and engage their defense platforms in a war of attrition," Hayes said. "They still think we play by their rules." Dr. Wright, spool up the Epstein drives. Calculate a slip space jump not to the edge of their system, but dangerously deep. Put us directly behind their moon. "Admiral, jumping that deep into a gravity well is incredibly risky," Wright warned. "We didn't build this fleet to be safe, Doctor. We built it to end a war." Light years away, Emperor Korvax sat upon his crystalline throne in the grand palace of Veyr Prime. He was waiting for a triumphant transmission from Admiral Zorath. He was expecting footage of a burning human world. Instead, the sky above his capital city suddenly screamed. The planetary defense alarms, silent for 3,000 years, erupted into a deafening wail. Korvax rushed to the massive balcony of his citadel, looking up at the daytime sky. The clouds were parting, pushed away by a massive displacement of atmospheric pressure. "Emperor," his Minister of Defense cried out, bursting onto the balcony. "A massive fleet just dropped out of slip space. They bypassed our perimeter entirely. They are hiding behind the moon." "The human vermin?" Korvax sneered, refusing to succumb to the rising panic in his chest. "Let them cower behind our satellite. Activate the planetary shield. If they show their faces, our orbital cannons will vaporize them." "Sire, they aren't targeting our ships. They aren't targeting the surface," the minister's voice cracked. "They are attaching tethers to the moon." On the dark side of the lunar surface, the United Earth Retaliatory Fleet had initiated the most audacious, terrifying tactical maneuver in human history, Project Atlas. 200 Dreadnought-class carriers drove their massive carbon nanotube grappling anchors deep into the lunar crust. Simultaneously, Dr. Wright overrode the safety protocols on all 200 Epstein fusion drives, directing their thrust not for interstellar travel, but for raw, unadulterated towing power. Humanity was not going to shoot at the planetary shield. They were going to drop the moon on it. Engines at maximum yield, Dr. Wright reported from the Daedalus, the ship groaning violently under the immense structural strain. Lunar orbit is destabilizing. Trajectory lock achieved. From the surface of Vere Prime, Emperor Korvax watched in sheer, mind-breaking terror as his planet's moon visibly shifted in the sky. It was growing larger. It was descending. "Hail them," Korvax whispered, dropping to his knees. The arrogance that had defined his reign evaporated in an instant, replaced by the primal, crushing fear of an apex predator. "Hail them. Offer them our surrender. Offer them vassalage. Offer them everything." Aboard the Daedalus, the communications officer looked at Admiral Hayes. "Sir, we are receiving a frantic, unencrypted broadcast from the planet's surface. The Veyran Emperor is demanding to speak with you. He's offering unconditional surrender." Hayes looked at the holographic display. The moon was now caught in Veyr Prime's gravity well, plummeting toward the planet like a rogue asteroid. "Open a channel. Audio only," Hayes commanded. The frantic, desperate voice of Emperor Korvax echoed on the human bridge. "Commander of the human fleet, I am Emperor Korvax. We yield. We surrender our armadas, our technology, our worlds. Stop your attack. You have proven your dominance. We will serve you." Hayes leaned toward the microphone. His voice was calm, devoid of any hatred, which only made it more terrifying. "Emperor Korvax, you crossed the Sol exclusion line. You ignored the beacons. You viewed our silence as weakness and our home as a resource." Hayes paused, watching the telemetry data as the moon began to glow red from atmospheric friction. "We don't want your service. We don't want your technology. And we certainly don't want an empire." "Then what do you want?" Korvax screamed over the sound of the deafening atmospheric roar outside his palace. "We want to be left alone," Hayes replied coldly, "and we are making sure the rest of the galaxy understands that." Hayes severed the connection. The Veyran planetary shield was a marvel of galactic engineering, capable of deflecting the energy output of a small star. But it was entirely bound by the laws of physics. When the descending moon, a mass of trillions of tons moving at 20 kilometers a second, slammed into the localized energy field, the shield didn't break. It was simply overwhelmed by the kinetic energy transfer. The shield generators on the planet's surface violently overloaded, detonating like thermonuclear bombs. The shield shattered like glass. And then, the moon made landfall. The impact cracked the tectonic plates of Veyr Prime, a wall of superheated earth and fire, 10 miles high, swept across the planet's surface at supersonic speeds. The ocean's flash boiled. The atmosphere ignited. Then, Emperor Korvax, his crystalline palace, and the entire Veyran ruling class were vaporized in a fraction of a millisecond. From orbit, the human fleet detached their tethers and retreated into the safety of the dark void, watching as the verdant jewel of the Veyran Empire was reduced to a swirling, molten ball of magma and ash. There were no cheers on the bridge of the Daedalus. There was only the grim, silent acknowledgement of a job completed. The sleeping giant had not just awakened. It had fundamentally rewritten the rules of galactic survival. "Admiral," General Hartford's voice came through the secure quantum comm line from Earth. "Sensor arrays indicate that the Galactic Syndicate's observational stealth drones were present in the system. They recorded the entire engagement." "Good," Hayes said, staring out at the burning world. "Make sure they get a clear look. Let them broadcast it to every civilized system in the Orion Arm." Humanity had been tested, and their response was disproportionate, absolute, and undeniably permanent. Hubris had led the Veyran armada to Earth, but it was humanity's terrifying grasp of raw, kinetic brutality that ensured they would never return. The Galactic Syndicate updated the Sol Exclusion Zone's parameters the following cycle. It was no longer a quarantine warning the galaxy to stay away from a developing, highly dangerous species. It was a formal border drawn by humanity itself. The Veyran Empire was gone, reduced to cosmic dust. The galaxy finally understood the terrifying truth. Humanity did not build an empire because they were too busy building an execution block.